Guys, Mark with On the Wrong Lead, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be responding to some Twitter slash live video national television drama that took place on Sunday and then into Monday in the racing Twitter sphere, and it involved a little bit of Andy Serling, a little bit of Orlando Noda, and it got really stupid. And I think a lot of Twitter controversy is really insane, so I want to kind of talk through this. So, what ended up happening? Well, in Saratoga on Sunday, a horse by the name of You're to Blame won the eighth race. Eighth race was originally carded on the turf, and You're to Blame was entered as an MTO. We got about a half-inch of rain overnight from Saturday into Sunday. Everything came off the turf, and this horse ended up, I think, going off about 7 or 8 to 1. As far as I capped it, it seemed like a pretty logical horse, but Andy Serling did not agree with me, and after the horse won, and won fairly impressively, I kind of stalked a fast pace and ended up drawing off to win by probably 6 lengths with a rat or tees up. Andy Serling got on national television and took a couple digs at Orlando Noda. How Orlando Noda claims these type of horses, he moves them up, and he basically implied he was a doper, right? So Twitter blew up because, everybody loves Andy on Twitter, and oh my god, Noda's a doper, and there's this whole thing. And I don't really want to talk about my feelings on Orlando Noda. I think you can make your own judgments on him and, the horses he claims, but I think this is a little bit of a different scenario. And so what I really want to respond to is what happened on Monday. On Monday, Timeform US came out and put out their speed figures for this race. You're to Blame got a 123. Now, if you know anything about Timeform speed figs, a 123 is basically a stakes caliber performance, and this was an allowance. So you're going, wait a second. Orlando Noda claims a 7-year-old horse. Suddenly, first off the claim, the horse runs an all-time career top and runs a stakes level performance in an allowance field. So horse racing Twitter blows up, and there's a ton of drama. People coming to Noda's defense, people beating up Noda for being a doper, the whole deal, right? So I want to talk through this whole scenario. I want to talk about what happened, and my real takeaway here is that I think the figure that Timeform gave this race is absolute and complete BS. And I'm going to talk to you about why I think it's BS, where I think that they screwed up, and how you as a handicapper can look at certain speed figures, realize that they are suspect, and effectively downgrade them in your handicapping. Realize when, because You're to Blame is going to run, his next race, and he's going to be a very short-priced favorite, and I think he's a massive play against in that spot, and I'll tell you why. So let's get into a little bit of what actually transpired here. We've got a half-inch of rain overnight. Track starts off as sloppy and sealed. After about 3 races, and I was sitting in the grandstand, so I'm watching the track maintenance workers. The first 3 or so races of the day, they floated the track. And what a float means is they basically take a big heavy weight, and between every race, they drag it across the top of the track. And that helps squeeze the water out of that track. It compresses the surface down, pushes water out to the side. After the 3rd or so race, they started harrowing the one path. And what a harrow is basically a rake. Get towed behind a tractor, and they rake the surface. So they harrowed the surface and then refloated it. Now the thing is, if you're watching on television, you have no idea that it's being harrowed and refloated. About midway through the card, maybe race 6 or race 7, they harrowed the entire surface. They harrowed about probably 4 harrow paths wide, and they left the outside floated. So this creates a couple of situations. So the first one, and again, we're talking about what actually transpired during that day, but we had changing track conditions. It was sunny. Now it was very, very humid, but it was probably in the mid 80s, and they're taking and forcing water out of that track. They're drying the track out as the day goes along, and that track is changing. So let me talk about a couple of factors that make this race and this speed figure very suspect, in my opinion. First one is, this was an MTO. You're to Blame was a main track only horse. If Orlando Noda claims a horse and he thinks he claims a monster, He's not going to ship it to Saratoga and try to hide it in an MTO field. He's going to go into an open allowance. The reason you put a horse in an MTO field is you're trying to find a soft spot for a purse. So Noda looked at the card, said, oh geez, I think we're going to get some rain. This is a softer, easier spot for this horse. You're to blame. Okay? The second thing here was the field, and this happens a lot at Saratoga, when you have these turf races that get rained off, especially on the weekends. You have a lot of connections who flew in from out of town, and they want to go home on Monday and tell all their friends that they watched their horse run at Saratoga. So you will get horses that don't belong in the race who don't scratch out. There were a lot of turf horses that stayed in this field, specifically the pace setter, the two, who had no business being in this field. So sometimes you're watching a performance and you see, oh, this Noda horse just drew away by 6 lengths and it looks super visually impressive. But really what it is a bunch of turf horses that don't want to run on the dirt, and all those other horses stopped, and You're to Blame just happened to be the one real dirt horse that happened to perform. Also, I have You're to Blame's form sitting up there. On top is the formulator with the last few races. Below is time form figures. If you notice where this horse has been running, the Brooklyn, a G2, running in a couple of black type stakes at Churchill and at Oaklawn, this horse was keeping pretty good company. Like he was in some tough spots. All of a sudden, an MTO field in an allowance at Saratoga is just a ton of class relief. So it's not shocking that he jumped up and ran really well versus softer company. Okay, we talk about class. This is a major amount of class relief. And You're to Blame also had a lot of what we refer to as back class, meaning he had run some very good figures in the past that made him a player here. And I sort of alluded to the track conditions. I think the track conditions are what I really want to dig into. If you talk about how a track and how they make speed figures at a track, they create something called a par. So what a par is every speed figure does it slightly differently, but they create what an average horse should run across those conditions on that day, and they assign it a certain figure. I happen to know them for Bears speed figures. Their average horse is the average allowance horse, and that figure should be an 80. Okay, so this horse had been running slightly above those 80 figures, so he's better than your average allowance horse. But the problem with the par is, if you have a track that the first 3 races, it's sloppy sealed. They upgrade it to muddy. And then the last 4 or 5 races, they upgraded it to fast. They completely skipped good. They went right to fast. Now, we all know track ratings are a joke anyways. They can label whatever they see, whatever they want. There's no standard there. But what ends up happening is the fact that we know this track was drying all day. It got upgraded twice. So you have like 6 races in there where the track was labeled fast, but we know it was drying through there. That means that fast in one race isn't fast in the next. What often happens in these scenarios is that they will have to create multiple pars. What that means is, and what I'm assuming happened this day, and I don't know when they did it, I'm going to bet you though that Timeform took those first 3 sloppy races and they parred them together. They took the next, I think it was 2 or 3 muddy races, and they parred them together, and then they probably parred all those last 6 races together. Now, what oftentimes happens in this type of scenario is you will look for a horse that runs consistent forms, and you'll try to check your par. What they will do is they'll say, okay, we have a horse, and I have a couple examples here, that always runs a pretty consistent race. And if you actually look at You're to Blame, he's a good par horse. If you look at his last 4 races, he ran an 80, an 86, an 86, and an 82. He basically runs, mid-ish 80s, So you would expect him to run an 83, 84 buyer in this sort of figure. If you look down at Timeform, you see he runs kind of that 108, 110, 101, right? So maybe he runs a 106, 1-ish, 106, 108 range is what you would expect for him on Timeform. But what sometimes happens is, I don't know where they did their par check in here. And what probably happens here is you have a situation that they looked at one of those 6 races and they picked out a horse that they knew was a pretty consistent performer. They looked at their figure and they tried to basically balance their par to that one race. you end up in a situation where a horse comes back and runs. Basically, the track conditions elevate that performance, and it's because of a bad figure. And I'm going to show you why I think You're to Blame's figure is one of those ones, right? So what everybody threw up caution, what everybody got all upset about, was if you look at You're to Blame, you're talking a horse that runs 108, 110s, right? And he runs a 123. So everybody's going, well, Noda improved this horse 13 or 15 points to a career top off the best race of his career. Obviously, he's dirty. Obviously, he's doping. Well, let's look at the winner of the next race, right? The winner of the next race was Royal Flag. Royal Flag won the Shuvi, okay? If you look at Royal Flag's Timeform US figs, 116, 117, 111 are the last three. Well, 115 before that. So you expect Royal Flag's going to run a 115, a 116, a 117. Royal Flag ran a 122. So Royal Flag also got a very elevated figure here. Now, Royal Flag was running in a G2 versus much tougher company, but still very much an all-time career top. So are we making the assumption here that You're to Blame and Royal Flag, both in consecutive races on a track we know was very quickly changing, freaked in through career tops? Or maybe is the par in this race bad? All of the speed figures out of this race are elevated, and therefore we're seeing, Twitter outrage and people throwing up all these doping allegations when really just the figure was bad. Now, I haven't seen the Bear speed figure that came out of the You're to Blame race. I do know, though, that the Bear for Royal Flag came back as, I'm just verifying here, as a 93. So the Bear speed fig seems to be very consistent with other races. And I think this could be a situation where, and I know, DRF does have a person on track at Saratoga, and they are probably adjusting those par figures and adjusting that bias every single race. I have a feeling that Brisnet probably doesn't have, that Timeform US probably does not have a person on track every single race, and is therefore not adjusting it every single race, and is probably a little bit more broad brush. So a couple things you can do here as a handicapper. How do you, because obviously we want to take away information and make ourselves better handicappers out of a situation like this. What I would tend to say is, you see tracks, first thing, I play a lot of Saratoga, so I will notate in my book track conditions on certain days. So on this day, I basically say, I have a note in there that said started sloppy, went to muddy, and then upgraded fast, not really. I don't think the track was really fast till, maybe the last race of the day. I think it was more on that good kind of area. And the other thing, and I didn't mention this before, is also I was sitting on track and watching. They did not have the harrows down very far. They were only raking just the top surface. They weren't really digging into it. And that'll also oftentimes also produce a little bit of a faster time. But with all that said, I think there's a lot of Twitter controversy over this. I think it's really all fluffed. I think as a handicapper, you always want to look at figures and have it in your head, well, how did that figure happen? I think this is just a situation of a fluffed figure due to the fact of track conditions, and we're seeing a whole Twitter kerfluffle over not a lot. So if you like this type of stuff, like and subscribe to our content. We all do this for free. The likes mean a lot. The subscriber count means a lot to us, and it kind of is what keeps us motivated to keep doing this stuff. I'll have a few more of these as the Saratoga meet goes along. But till next time, good luck.